Hi, this is a conversation with Dr. Spencer MacCallum, who is an anthropologist and is visiting Universidad Francisco Marroquín. Dr. MacCallum, why is it that property is a consequence of agreements?
Well, property is very little understood, and it's been exciting for me to understand it more and more, to understand social organization. It's the basis of social organization. So many people think of property as the way that a squirrel thinks about when he finds a nut and he runs away from other people. From the other squirrels, he runs away. That's not property, that's possession. But possession is different from property. Property is an understanding, a tacit understanding among people and among a population. They don't even realize that it's natural, it's normal, that brings the resources available to society into use. It makes it available for people. Because if there were no property, then each time you wanted to use something, you'd have to fend off everybody else. And then you can't make very productive use of something if you're having to fend off everybody else. And you couldn't sell it to another person because what are you selling? He will have to defend it too. But with property, you have by consensus of a community the right to say how it is to be used, the disposition that's to be made of it. And this way, anyone can always, if they want to use some certain resource, they can find the person who is responsible for that resource. And responsible means respond, who can respond. Who is the person who can respond about this thing or about that thing? You find that person, and then you can make an agreement perhaps with him. And you don't have to try to deal with everybody in the universe who wants to grab this thing. My grandfather once made the example of monkeys with bananas. They'll grab a banana, they'll run away from the other monkeys. What do people do? If it were property, that the monkey wouldn't run away from the other monkeys. He would bring a whole shipload of bananas to New York City and call out for everybody, come and get a banana, come get a banana. It's a very different matter. Property is inclusive of others. It makes available possible use and availability of all the resources of our universe.
So property is not theft, as some
property
people contend.
is definitely not theft. And yet that's the popular view. We must make the distinction between possession and title or ownership. Title or ownership is something that we can transfer to another person. Then he is the responsible person. He is the person who can respond with respect to that thing.
You, a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned your grandfather, Spencer Heath. Please tell us how you got involved with his idea and how has been the path through those ideas for you.
Well, it's kind of a long and complicated story, but it began. My grandfather was an unknown philosopher because he never had students to carry on his ideas, his thought. But he came driving through Princeton, New Jersey, where I was at the university one day, and asked me, how are things going? And I said, well, they could be better, because I was very much concerned. I'd been studying contemporary literature, and we were studying a book by Kafka called The Trial. And that was an articulated nightmare, the trial. A dilemma, it's a paradox. His message was that for a human being to live with dignity as a human being, you had to first go through the act of cutting your throat. Now, I was trying to work my way out of that logically, and I was having a very tough time, and I was getting perhaps dangerously depressed about it. And he came through, and we sat up all one night. And when the sky began to get light in the morning, he had shown me how to logically get out of that paradox in a way that Kafka would not have been happy about, but would have had to respect, I believe. And that got me to listening to everything that this man, Spencer Heath, had to say. And it has opened up an entire life of interest for me.
Did that also lead you to the study of property?
Yes, and in anthropology, understanding social organization. And property is the basis of social organization. Property is not something established by law, by the government. It's something that is instinctual in human beings. Just as building birds' nests is instinctual with birds. It is instinctual with human beings to develop whole systems of ownership of property, and different kinds of systems depending on the technology technical level of a given society. It's been a fascinating study.
If a student approaches you and asks Dr. MacCallum, what would you recommend for me to understand the role of property, what would you recommend?
I don't know quite how to answer that. I'd say look around, observe what people are doing and how they are relating to one another. They don't relate successfully by shooting one another and killing one another, but see how they are cooperating. How are they able to cooperate? What is the basis of cooperation? And it always comes down to, in the first place, property, a proper understanding of ownership.
So property and peace, for example, are related directly?
Well, of course, property opens the path to peaceful relations, to voluntary exchange relations.
So there is a relationship between property and peaceful cooperation and peaceful relationship. Is there also a relationship between property and a good standard of living?
Well, of course, because property makes it possible to use something productively, to use a resource productively, because everyone recognizes that you are the responsible person, you are the responder with respect to this, and that you can transfer that responsibility to another person. And in this way, the resources available to society are made available, can be used, and available to everyone, depending only on the ability to make a reciprocal exchange with another person. And that's the basis of society's voluntary exchange. And property makes that possible. Property is a relationship not between a person and a thing, but between a person and all other people with respect to things. If you see the difference there, it's a psychological relationship among people in the population. It's not something material. It is with respect to material things. But a title and ownership is something psychological.
Being an anthropologist and not an economist, for example, did that approach, the anthropological approach, help you to understand the concept of property?
Well, surely. In a primitive society, you have property. Property is the basis of social organization anywhere, in the contemporary world or in the more primitive world. It's the basis of capitalism, and it was the basis of kinship structure in early society.
So it does help this other approach from the point of view of anthropology.
That understanding property is
Right.
is helpful for anthropology.
Yes.
Yes, in both ways, certainly, because anthropology is observing how people behave, and especially how people behave successfully. You can have a bunch of people and they're all fighting, and that's not very interesting to watch. But to see how people can relate to one another and be creative on the environment, the evolution of society, of social organization, is fascinating. My grandfather, Spencer Heath, defined society as that fraction of a population, not just a lot of people, but that fraction of a population that is reciprocally exchanging goods and services contractually. And when you define society this way, it's a very new thing, society. It's only a couple of centuries old because we needed to develop over a long period facility with numbers in order to have bookkeeping, accountancy. We needed to have supportive institutions such as insurance and finance institutions of all kinds in order for the cooperating group, instead of being a small village or a clan, the cooperating group now, society, is worldwide, it's global. And you're dealing impersonally now with people from the other ends of the earth. It's an exciting thing. Now, it's an organization, society is an organization of living units, individuals organized through the market. And this, it's a new life form. We needn't be afraid of being part of a new life form because it is working to make possible the fulfillment of individuals everywhere. Individual fulfillment is what it's leading to. But this new life form has an ability that is brand new among all life forms. It works on the environment creatively. It is able to make the environment more and more habitable for itself, whereas all other life forms, including early humans, what you might call them, they were practicing proto-society, early society. All other life forms are predatory on the environment. They exhaust the environment. They make it, over time, less and less habitable for their own kind. But society has the ability to do otherwise, to make the environment more and more habitable for itself. This is a creative potential ability that it has. And I find it very exciting.
Dr. MacCallum, what happens with common services?
That's a good question for you. This new evolving society that we are blessed with has up to now provided in abundance our individual needs, such as food, clothing, and shelter. What it has not yet evolved to provide us is our common or community needs. In a community, we must have services that are not to an individual, but to a place, making that a safe place and a place that people can come together and interact. Up until now, we have been relying on the man on horseback, the way the Assyrians and the Egyptians and the Romans all did, the man with the sword to collecting taxation by force, which is a form of universal slavery, taxation is. And interestingly, in the old world, the philosophers and all, they could not imagine society without slavery. And they sort of apologized for it sometimes, but they knew no alternative. Well, now we know that slavery needs, physical slavery, chattel slavery, need be no part of society. But we still believe in taxation, and we do not think that society can exist without taxation. We're very much like the ancient philosophers. We sort of apologize for it, but we can't see any alternative. But the evolution of society, so recent, so new, is evolving in that direction also, of meeting not only our individual needs, but our community needs as well.
So community services such as?
Well, such as laying out of streets, protection, fire protection, a system of settling disputes. Basically, a free place where people can be secure in their persons. You can't make an individual safe, really. He can only be safe by being in a safe place. And that is a community which is very poorly administered now. We don't know how to do it very well now. We still look to the man on the horseback with the sword of taxation, which is a very inefficient, it's a very counterproductive way to behave. Human relations are successful to the extent that they are totally voluntary and reciprocal and benefit all parties.
Well, Dr. MacCallum, thank you for sharing this with us, and thank you too.